Welcome. I'm Andy Simon, and with me today is Jamie Candee, and we want to do a catalytic conversation to introduce you, our listeners, to May 13th, a big event that's come together, catalyzing the future, rethinking women's leadership in business. With the Women's Business Collaborative, we've assembled 40 women and some men to help talk about all kinds of issues about women in business and how we're beginning to build a far more diverse, equitable, inclusive, belonging business environment. I've asked Jamie to talk to us today in a catalytic conversation because she's going to be the chair of the panel on women as leaders. Now, a little bit about Jamie. I know Jamie for quite some time. She is a chapter in my book, Rethink, Smashing the Myths of Women in Business. And in fact, this event came about in part because of the book. But Jamie's story is about somebody who might have been told, oh, women aren't good leaders. And I know Jamie when she led Questar Assessment, which was my husband's company. And then she went back to Admentum, a company she had been with, to become their CEO, and is growing Admentum into being a leader in educational kinds of programs for kids. I would like you to meet Jamie and listen to her talk about how are we developing women as leaders to really smash that myth that, oh, women can't lead. They're not decisive. They can't make up their minds. They don't need all those policies and procedures. They just know how to get it done. Jamie, thank you for being with me today.
Thank you so much, Andy. It's great to be here.
Tell our listeners about Jamie and the work she's doing to help build Admentum and women as leaders, because I think they're connected. Please.
Yes, they are. Thank you. Well, so my background, I've spent almost my entire career in education, and being able to bridge education and then building a great organization is something that I'm very passionate about. And this is the second company that I've had the great opportunity and benefit to be CEO at. The first was at Questar, where you and I got to know each other, and then had the chance. I was with Admentum for a number of years, left to go be CEO at Questar, and now I've come back to Admentum. And, you know, one of the things that drives me is really looking at the landscape. If you look at education in general, and this is true across industries, but in education, it particularly stands out around how women rise to the top ranks. And so if you look at the percentage of teachers in this country, well over 50%, 60% plus teachers are women. So you have the vast majority of educators in this country as women. And then when you look at the top positions in education, whether it's a superintendent of instruction, a state education director, commissioner, or a CEO of an education company, the percentage of women in those positions falls well below 15%. So you see a big drop off. And so at Admentum, we have over 50%, just slightly more than 50% of our workforce. We have 1,000. We call ourselves Admentors, are women. And my goal and my passion is I've had a lot of great mentors in my career, and I've worked really, really hard to get to where I'm at. And so I look at this great organization that we're building together, and I'm trying to be very purposeful and very thoughtful around how we build the opportunity for women to rise through the ranks and to get into leadership positions that they really care about and that they are interested in. So we do a lot of formal and informal things at Admentum. For me, though, it's a personal passion. From a young age, when I was a little baby, my mom ran her own company. And so I've seen what hard work and perseverance can do. And I've basically set my life, my course of life in focusing on both how I develop myself, continuously learning, as well as how I can pay that forward and help other women work on their careers and develop into great leaders.
Well, you know, and we have discussed, and I had the pleasure of being on a panel talking
Yes.
to your members not long ago, that women as leaders often lead differently. And as you and I were talking about the work that we did for the book, you were quite descriptive about how you went about understanding the complexity of the company, the way in which to integrate it into your customers. And it was the kernel of, well, we just don't command and control.
That's right.
We're not going to have all the answers. We have a whole different way of seeing what women can be and men, and begin to change the conversation. Can you share that with our listeners as well?
Sure. You know, when I came back to Admentum, I had been gone for 4 years, but I did this at Questar, and I think great leaders, whether men or women, do this naturally. But for women, one of the things that I think is very much a part of who we are from a gender perspective is the capacity and desire to listen. So one of the first things that I do, whether it is going back into an organization, taking on a new opportunity, sitting on a board of directors, whatever the new challenge might be, the most important thing you can do initially is to listen, to really understand the culture of the company, culture of the organization. I joined WBC last year, about a year and a half ago now. And one of the first things that I did is I'm surrounded by these amazing women, and I just listen to their stories and to who they are. And from that listening, and I firmly believe this, culture eats strategy for lunch, 100% true. If you can listen and understand the inner workings of the organization, the culture, what makes it thrive, who the people are, the nuances about how people work that you can't, get out of a written report, things of that nature, it really helps you understand directionally where you want to take the organization. And it also allows you to build a bridge and to connect with others, going back to the point that you just said, which is no one leader is going to figure out a strategy, execute on a strategy, and make a company successful. Simply doesn't happen. It happens through the universal strength, collaboration, and power of bringing people together. And so that's my strategy. And so when I came back to Admentum, being gone for several years, I had the opportunity of being with the company for 8 years, then being gone for nearly 4 years. And when I came back, some things were the same, but many things were different. And so the only way I could really figure out where we were at and understand what opportunities we had was by spending those first couple of months really listening, talking to our customers, spending a lot of time with our team, asking more questions than answering. And from that point, you build that foundation that you can then build upon in terms of bringing people together and really building a rich and cohesive strategy to move the organization forward. So that is my strategy. I pair that, I very much care about servant leadership. So it is, you are here as a leader to help others succeed. So you're put on this earth to find the strength and the joy and the skill and the opportunity of other people, and then you invest in them to help them move forward. And I care very, very much about servant leadership, and I subscribe to servant leadership as really the core foundation of who I am and how I lead.
Do you think that there is, women and men are different, and yes. I've learned to just simply accept that.
Yes.
Today, the conversation between men and women is beginning to finally change.
Yes.
And since half your organization is guys and the other half are gals, and you have a particular style that's emerging, I thought it might be interesting to listen to how the guys are responding to that style, as opposed to what I'll call a more militaristic command and control, waiting for the leader to tell us what to do, because this is much more entrepreneurial and much more of a collaborative organization where no one person has all the answers. And leaders need followers who embrace the mantra and how we're going to do it, and then take it from there, where that strategy will never, ever get executed because people will know exactly what did she mean and will I risk my job? So what do the guys think?
What was really interesting, we talked earlier about the panel that we had you on at Admentum. We had about 300 Admentors. This was a panel that we did for our organization, specifically talking about women in leadership and how to advance women. And we had a couple of our female executive team members on. It was moderated by one of our fabulous leaders in the organization. And we had you and 2 outside leaders in, and you were one of them. And one of the things that struck me that I haven't even shared with you yet is when we were done, we received emails and in the chat at the end of the panel, and I was struck by the number of male leaders and male just Admentors who had joined the panel and had talked about how much they appreciated what we were doing to invest in women, to bring to light these opportunities to develop women. And there was a theme that came out of that, and I've heard this from other men in the organization, and that is setting the stage and demonstrating empathy and what it looks like to be an empathetic leader. And I think, we have lost a lot of that in corporate America, and I don't know that we ever had it. But in this moment, when we look at all the things that we have dealt with in the last year plus with the pandemic, with our social unrest, the opportunities that we've had to really kind of open our eyes and look at who we are as people, who we are as organizations, and what are we doing to really empower, serve, and be fair to others. We have brought to light this idea at Admentum that we have to be more empathetic leaders. And I'll be honest with you, it has been hard. I wasn't raised that way in terms of moving up the ladder in corporate America. I was developed to put your feelings and your empathy off to the side and, manage to the policies and do all these things and, very direct command and control manner. You know what I'm talking about. You're in banking. Yeah. You remember this from banking and all the other opportunities and experiences you've had. But I've really appreciated how more men in our organization are coming forward and talking about how much they appreciate the empathy that they're seeing in the organization. And I see them demonstrating it. And I'll give you one other example. We have a great leader in our organization. He's our vice president of operations. His name is Matt Spencer. And Matt spent his early part of his career, he served in the Marines. And he's an amazing human being. And one of the things that I think is also such a great example of strong leadership in the organization is you have somebody who everyone knows served our country, but he is such a perfect example of empathetic leadership in our organization. He is strong, he's directive, but he has an incredible amount of empathy, and he empowers people and he brings them together. And so when you look at the things that we're doing at Inventum to really try to empower people, to empower women, and then you pair that with hiring really great male leaders, that's a recipe for really strong outcomes in terms of advancing women and advancing anybody who's really interested in a leadership career. And how do you develop the right kinds of skills so that people will follow you, to your point?
To push a little further, the world today is focused on diversity, equity, inclusion. Yeah. I heard the head of HubSpot talk about belonging. He had an interesting story because when he formed HubSpot, Sean Hannigan, he did it with 10 guys. All of them came out of Sloan. They were all guys. And then he really realized that was a mistake and tried to bring in a diverse talent. And they didn't fit, and they didn't want to stay. Even if they tasted it, it wasn't tasting good because it wasn't who they were. They were the outsiders. They were the barbarians at the gate. And so it becomes interesting to watch you begin a culture in which women can in fact lead men, and men can in fact lead women, but not necessarily the way they had been taught when they were in the Marines, or necessarily when they were the mothers. And there's sort of almost a new emerging leadership style that's developing, which is grounded in that listening and the empathy, understanding how the others feel, but also being able to communicate differently. Do you find yourself, I always preach to overdetermine success. You have to over communicate. If not, people will make up a story. They won't know what you really meant. Do you find yourself that the communication side has to be accelerated?
Yes, I do. Similar to what you believe about communication, I have a strong belief that either you tell the story or somebody will tell it for you.
And it won't be the same.
Yes, and that's right. And so I am a huge believer in communicating the same point or the same principle, the same expectation over and over again, but in many different ways: written, verbal, do videos, have small group discussions. I do believe there is a acceleration happening. The access to communication, just how people communicate. If you even just look at companies now like Admentum, we embrace social media. We're on all the major social media channels. People can respond to the things that we're putting out. Your team members can read that, right? And unless they really understand who you are and where you're going, there's lots of different things that happen through various communication channels. And so the way you solve for that as leadership is to over communicate, to make sure that you're consistent. I'm a big historian, so I always start with the where did we come from, where are we going, and why. And everything that I do, you'll hear me talk about where did we come from, where are we going, and why. And that really connects people, right? And I think, with especially with the challenge that we've all put in front of ourselves as leaders, to not just talk about DEI, like what are you actually doing, right? And to be open and vulnerable. For me, that has been the biggest change in the last year and a half in my communication style, is learning that style of empathetic leadership and communication. When things were really, really bad at the beginning of the pandemic, and they still are very challenging for everyone, I had some team members come to me and say, we really have to focus on mental health at Admentum. And that was really hard for me because I didn't even know how to approach it, right? When you're physically ill, people are used to that, right? You go to the doctors, I broke my leg, I got the flu. But mental health, being able to talk about it and being okay that I don't feel well. And I'm challenged, and finding resources and ways to communicate that's one example of, it's really important as leaders we do that. It's certainly not natural for a lot of us to be able to do it. All of us have dealt with our own mental health challenges in the last year and a half through everything that we've worked through as humans. And so what I'm finding is there's a need for acceleration. There's also a need to be repetitive because everyone is just inundated with a lot of different kinds of communication coming at them. So creating consistency is important. And then also a different kind of communication. It is, as a leader, demonstrating being authentic and showing people strength comes from people seeing you as a human and knowing that just like everybody else, I'm not sitting here in my home office away from people that I love, okay with it. I'm not, right? Like I've had to work through that like everybody else has. And as a leader, it's my position and opportunity to say those things because it helps others heal and come together. And you also generate more respect and more connection with the people that you work with if you're able to share that level of, transparency and vulnerability. So that's been a big shift I personally have been working on over the last year.
It's interesting listening to you as you're discussing that because, I started at the beginning before we got on to tell you that I've adopted change. How do you make change your friend is my story for this year, because we can't get rid of pandemic time yet. But if we can adapt to it with good new skills about how we can be agile and let change happen in a positive fashion, collaborate with our mind and tell it a new story, which is what you've been doing. Mm-hmm. And it's okay. And we come out actually stronger, not fearing the unknown or the unfamiliar, which your brain hates, and beginning to see how there's opportunity there to not only for ourselves, but for all those 1,000 people counting on us. Because at the end of the day, they're all looking to you as their role model.
Yes.
And what we've learned, as an anthropologist, what we've learned is if they don't have a good role model, they'll go figure it out on their own. Yes. And it won't look anything like you would have liked, because people hate to be without leaders. They don't quite know what to do. They become deer in the headlight. And that's the scariest part. As we're coming out of this, if we're coming out of this pandemic period, are you seeing some key things as a woman leading an organization, or simply as a leader of an organization, that might be at least worth sharing as we begin to wrap up our conversation?
Yes, I think the most important thing for leaders, and I call on all women leaders, but leaders in general, to set this example, is this last year plus, the world has changed. And I would really like to stress that change is inevitable. How you manage change is the most important thing, one of the most important things that you can do as a leader. And, for me personally, there's a set of things I don't want to change, right? My health. For me to stay physically and mentally well, I have to work out every single day. I'm not going to change that because I know what will happen if I do. But all the other things around me, how you prosper, how you progress, you have to change. And one of the most important things we can do as leaders, and I was sharing this with you before we started recording, I've been on a few different discussions with colleagues, CEOs, and I hear comments like, when we get back to normal, or how do I set a policy to make people turn their Zoom camera on? And I say back to leaders, why are you worrying about that? What you should be worrying about is, what did your employees find and value in this moment of chaos, right, that we've had the last year? And what are the things that they want moving forward to feel healthy and productive and valued and respected and motivated? And you should be asking those questions about everything that changed in this last year. Yes. What should remain as we move forward? And what would people like to see differently? And you should listen for that information to make sure that you understand this next, chapter of leadership, what it's going to take to be successful as a leader, because it's not going to be the same as the year prior or the 5 years prior to that. And so I think this is a call to action for all of us as leaders, that now is the time to listen, ask a lot of questions, observe the things that went really, really well for people in their lives. A lot of people will tell you that not traveling 100% of the time and being by their family more made them feel better as a whole person, and that in turn made them better as an employee. You should know those things before we come out of this pandemic fully, so that you can really embrace that. And then the things that didn't work, people wanting to have more social contact, yes, change, find ways to do that, make your office more collaborative, whatever it is that will bring people together for the greater good. You can focus on those things, but it will take change.
Everything, whether you go back to whatever you thought was that normal before. Yep. And very often it wasn't as good as you thought.
That's right.
And that's the part that I find very humorous as I've been interviewing people. Oh, I want to go back to that. Did you enjoy doing that? One gentleman I met, he flew every week, a little like you and I were fine. And he said, no, I'm home all the time. I said, so do you want to go back to that? No, I don't want to go back to, well, what is it that you want to go back to? I don't know, but I don't know. And the unknown is what is so scary for people.
Yes, absolutely.
And ambiguity betwixt and between is the most scary part for people. So now, as our listeners, when you come to our event on May 13th, Catalyzing the Future, Rethinking Women's Leadership in Business. And my hope is that you'll come away with how-tos. So I'm going to highlight some of the things that I've heard from Jamie. She may add a few more, but the call to action here is time to listen, because you are going through a period of transformation, and you'll know some things, perhaps you'll imply to others the things that matter to you, but not necessarily to them. And this is all caught in their stories. The second part is that if you're leading, you're going to need followers to know what the story is, because if you don't tell it, they're going to make one up for you. That's just human, right? And then this new normal coming out that you're going to lead us into, you're going to create, because it isn't going to look like it was, and it isn't going to look like you might have thought, because you quite frankly don't know quite what it is. But your clients aren't any less concerned about how this transformation is going to affect them. So women as leaders in business, the topic of our whole day together, it's really because we're doing things to transform the place of women today. In some ways, it's a great time to see this as an opportunity. I always preach, don't waste a crisis. You can't get them too often. Right. And now is a good time. Jamie was talking about diversity and inclusion. And in fact, on the panel was an extremely diverse group of women. Some of their stories were heart-rending. And yet the way in which they are leading is different, and people are following because they see them having great ideas and also including them in the conversations. So our call to act, go register for our May 13th event. You can find it at catalyzingthefuture.com or at my website, andeesimon.com or simonassociates.net. There's some pop-ups there, but I hope you'll come and join us. The conversation is going to be terrific. We have Mia Menz, who is the administrative officer at Sodexo, Becky Chambon, who's written several books on the stickiness of it all, right? And then we have, and my third one is Esther Aguilera, who is president of Wonderful Latina Organization. I'm sorry, Esther, I missed that. And I missed it because Jamie's dog walked behind her just as I was thinking.
This is working from home, right? Yeah, yeah.
And we're all walking.
The door. He opened the door, and I don't know how he did that, but that's amazing.
And I must tell you, it distracted me for a moment. But this is our catalytic conversation, and why not? Thanks, Jamie. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much.
I'll see you all on the 13th of May.
Bye-bye.
Bye.